The silence in the first-class cabin was deafening, as the woman in seat 2A turned around with a look of pure disgust etched across her perfectly made-up face. Her diamond earrings caught the overhead light as she slowly shook her head, her lips curling into a sneer that would have made anyone uncomfortable. "Really?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension as her eyes fixed on the simple wooden cross hanging from Jonathan Roumie's neck. "You're actually wearing that primitive little trinket in public? How embarrassing." The luxury of the first-class cabin seemed to amplify her words, the leather seats and polished surfaces creating an echo chamber for her cruel mockery. Jonathan's hand instinctively moved to touch the modest wooden cross that hung from a simple leather cord around his neck, his expression shifting from peaceful contentment to complete bewilderment. He had been quietly reading a book, enjoying what he thought would be a routine flight from Los Angeles to New York, when this unexpected attack on his faith shattered the tranquil atmosphere. The woman's designer handbag sat prominently on her lap, its gold hardware gleaming like a badge of her wealth and status. Her manicured finger pointed directly at Jonathan's cross as she continued her assault. "I mean, seriously, do you actually believe in that fairy tale nonsense? It's 2024, not the Middle Ages. People like you are exactly what's wrong with society today, clinging to your outdated superstitions like security blankets." Her voice carried throughout the cabin, ensuring that every passenger within earshot could hear her venomous words. Other passengers began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, some looking away in embarrassment at the woman's public display of cruelty, while others watched with a mixture of shock and growing disapproval. The flight attendants paused in their pre-flight preparations, uncertain how to handle this unexpected confrontation between passengers. Jonathan sat completely still, his gentle brown eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise and hurt, though his voice remained steady and calm when he finally spoke. "I'm sorry if my necklace offends you," he said quietly, his tone respectful despite the public humiliation he was enduring. "But this cross represents something very important to me. It's not meant to bother anyone." His response only seemed to fuel the woman's contempt, her perfectly styled hair bouncing as she shook her head with theatrical disgust. She had no idea that she had just launched a vicious attack on the man who had brought the story of Jesus Christ to millions of viewers around the world. She had no clue that the humble wooden cross she was mocking with such disdain was worn by the same person who had dedicated his life to portraying the very figure that cross represented. The irony was about to become devastatingly clear, and her words were about to backfire in the most public and embarrassing way possible. Have you ever been publicly mocked for your faith by a complete stranger? That moment when someone decides to attack what you hold most sacred, not in private, but in front of everyone around you, turning your deepest beliefs into their entertainment. It's one of the most humiliating experiences anyone can face. That crushing feeling when your core identity becomes the target of someone else's cruelty and ridicule. How would you react if someone ridiculed your most sacred beliefs in front of a crowd of strangers? Would you fight back with equal venom, matching their hostility with your own anger? Would you shrink away in embarrassment, tucking away the symbols of your faith to avoid further confrontation? Or would you find the strength to stand firm in who you are, even when facing public humiliation from someone who clearly sees your beliefs as nothing more than a joke? This is the incredible true story of how Jonathan Roumie, the talented actor who has brought Jesus Christ to life for millions of viewers in the groundbreaking series The Chosen, responded when a fellow passenger decided to make his faith the target of her public mockery. The woman sitting in that first-class cabin had no idea that she was about to launch a vicious attack on the very man who had dedicated his career to portraying the figure represented by that simple, wooden cross she found so offensive. What happened next would expose not only the cruel nature of religious intolerance, but also the power of responding to hatred with grace. It's a story that reveals how quickly mockery can backfire when it encounters authentic faith lived out in real time, and how sometimes the most powerful witness isn't found in grand speeches or dramatic gestures, but in the quiet dignity of someone who refuses to abandon their convictions, even when facing public ridicule from a stranger who thinks faith is nothing more than primitive superstition. Earlier that morning, Jonathan had arrived at Los Angeles International Airport, dressed simply. Dark jeans, a gray sweater, and comfortable shoes. Nothing about his appearance suggested he was one of the most recognizable faces in faith-based entertainment. The only distinctive element was the wooden cross hanging from a leather cord around his neck, a humble piece that held profound meaning rather than monetary value. As he made his way through the airport, a few fans recognized him. "Aren't you Jonathan from The Chosen?" asked a young mother with her children. "My family watches your show every week." Jonathan smiled warmly, genuinely touched by her words, and took a moment to speak with the children. His natural humility was evident in how he received such praise without pretense, thanking them sincerely for watching and supporting the show. In the first-class lounge, Jonathan found a quiet corner to respond to emails about his upcoming New York media appearances. The day was packed with interviews about the new season of The Chosen, fan events, and network meetings. He sipped his coffee, occasionally reviewing messages from his manager about schedule changes. The success of the show still amazed him. What had started as a crowd-funded project had become a global phenomenon. When boarding was announced, Jonathan made his way to the gate. The gate agent smiled as she scanned his boarding pass, clearly recognizing him. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Roumie. My whole family loves The Chosen." Jonathan thanked her with genuine appreciation, his response free of any ego or self-importance. Settling into his window seat in the third row of first class, Jonathan stowed his bag and pulled out a book he'd been meaning to finish. The cabin was filling with the usual mix of business travelers and affluent passengers, the familiar pre-flight routine unfolding around him with quiet efficiency. It was then that she boarded. The woman who would soon turn his peaceful flight into an unexpected test walked down the aisle with unmistakable confidence. She was impeccably dressed in designer clothing, complete with expensive jewelry that caught the cabin lights. Her Louis Vuitton handbag was positioned prominently, and her perfectly styled appearance suggested considerable time and money spent on her look. She took seat 2A, directly in front of Jonathan, and immediately began arranging her belongings with particular precision. Her interactions with flight attendants were polite, but clearly transactional, the courtesy of someone accustomed to being served rather than serving others. She ordered champagne before takeoff, her tone suggesting she expected immediate fulfillment of her requests. As Jonathan opened his book, he had no idea that the woman sitting just feet away would soon launch a public attack on the very symbol of faith that had guided his life and career. The simple wooden cross rested against his sweater, visible but understated, a quiet testimony to beliefs that had shaped him into the man millions had come to admire. 20 minutes into the flight, the woman in 2A turned around with obvious irritation, her eyes immediately fixated on Jonathan's wooden cross, and her expression twisted into disgust. "Seriously," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You're actually wearing that primitive little trinket? How embarrassing." Jonathan looked up from his book, genuinely confused by her hostile tone. "I'm sorry?" he asked quietly, his hand instinctively touching the cross. The woman's voice grew louder and more condescending. "That ridiculous fairy tale jewelry. Do you actually believe in that nonsense? It's 2024, not the Middle Ages. People like you are exactly what's wrong with society, clinging to your outdated superstitions." Other passengers began to shift uncomfortably, some looking away in embarrassment, while others watched with growing disapproval. The flight attendants paused their service, uncertain how to handle this unexpected confrontation. Jonathan remained calm despite the public humiliation. "I'm sorry if my necklace offends you, but this cross represents something very important to me. It's not meant to bother anyone." Her attacks only intensified. Important to you? It's a symbol of ignorance and weakness. Intelligent people don't need imaginary friends in the sky. She gestured dismissively at the cross. You're probably one of those people who thinks the world is only 6,000 years old. Absolutely pathetic. The businessman across the aisle lowered his magazine, no longer pretending not to listen. A woman 2 rows up turned completely around, her face showing clear disapproval of the ongoing assault. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin grew increasingly tense as more passengers became aware of the one-sided attack. Jonathan took a deep breath, his voice remaining respectful despite the cruel mockery. I understand we have different beliefs, and I respect your right to your opinions. But I don't think this conversation is helping anyone. His gentle response only seemed to fuel her contempt. Don't patronize me with your fake humility. You religious people are all the same, acting so superior while believing in ancient myths. She turned to address the other passengers, as if seeking validation for her attack. Can you believe people still fall for this stuff? It's like watching someone believe in Santa Claus as an adult. Her voice dripped with mockery as she continued her public humiliation of Jonathan, completely unaware that she was about to face the most embarrassing moment of her life. The tension in the cabin reached a breaking point as passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, many clearly disturbed by her unprovoked cruelty. What she didn't know was that her words were about to backfire in the most spectacular and public way possible. That's when everything changed. A man in the row behind Jonathan leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension. Ma'am, do you have any idea who you're talking to? The woman turned with irritation, clearly annoyed by the interruption. I don't care who he is. That doesn't change the fact that That's Jonathan Roumie, the man continued firmly. He plays Jesus Christ in The Chosen, one of the most successful faith-based series in television history. You're literally mocking the actor who portrays Jesus for wearing a cross. The color drained from the woman's face as the words sank in. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The businessman across the aisle shook his head in disbelief. You've got to be kidding me! You're attacking the man who plays Jesus for wearing a cross? The irony is incredible. Other passengers began murmuring among themselves, the recognition spreading through the cabin like wildfire. Oh my God, you're right, whispered a woman near the front. My whole family watches that show. We love him. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted completely as passengers looked at the woman with a mixture of shock and disapproval. The woman's designer confidence crumbled as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. I didn't know, she stammered, her voice barely audible. But the damage was done. A passenger pulled out her phone, clearly recognizing the absurdity of the situation. This is unbelievable. Someone just mocked Jesus Christ's actor for wearing a cross. The flight attendants exchanged glances, now understanding exactly who Jonathan was and how inappropriate the woman's behavior had been. The woman sank back into her seat, her face flushed with embarrassment as she realized that her attempt to publicly humiliate someone had backfired spectacularly. Jonathan remained gracious, even in his moment of vindication. It's all right, he said gently. We all make mistakes. But his kindness only made the woman's cruelty look worse by comparison. She had gone from being the aggressor to becoming the most embarrassed person on the entire flight, and everyone around her knew it. The cabin remained tense as other passengers continued to process what had just happened. The woman sat in stunned silence, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Jonathan, sensing the discomfort around him, spoke gently to the entire cabin. I appreciate everyone's support, but I don't want this to ruin anyone's flight. We all have different beliefs, and that's okay. An elderly gentleman in the front row turned around. Son, what you just demonstrated is exactly why your show means so much to people. You responded with grace when anyone else would have fought back. Several passengers nodded in agreement, and a woman across the aisle added, My family watches The Chosen every week. This is exactly how we'd hoped Jesus would respond. The woman who had started it all finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I was out of line. Her apology was stiff and uncomfortable, clearly more about her embarrassment than genuine remorse. Jonathan nodded graciously. Thank you for saying that. The cross isn't about judgment or superiority. It's about love and forgiveness. A businessman leaned forward. I'm not particularly religious, but what happened here wasn't right. Nobody should be attacked for their beliefs. The conversation naturally shifted as passengers began sharing their own experiences with faith and respect. The woman listened in silence, her worldview clearly shaken by both the revelation of who Jonathan was and his unexpected response to her cruelty. As the flight continued, the woman remained quiet, occasionally glancing at Jonathan with what appeared to be curiosity rather than contempt. The seeds of genuine reflection had been planted, though whether they would grow remained to be seen. The other passengers, meanwhile, had witnessed something powerful. Authentic faith lived out in real time, responding to hatred with grace, and turning a moment of division into an opportunity for understanding. The flight landed without further incident, and passengers began deplaning with the usual rush to gather belongings. The woman who had caused the confrontation moved slowly, clearly still processing what had happened. As she passed Jonathan's row, she paused briefly. I really am sorry, she said quietly, this time with what seemed like genuine regret. I was wrong to say those things. Jonathan looked up with a kind smile. We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is what we learn from them. She nodded, her designer confidence replaced by something more humble, and continued toward the exit without another word. 3 days later, Jonathan received an unexpected direct message on social media from an account with no profile picture. You probably don't remember me, but I was the woman on your flight who said terrible things about your cross. I've been thinking about what happened, and I wanted you to know that I looked up your show. I watched 2 episodes last night. I'm not ready to talk about faith, but I wanted to understand why that cross means so much to you. Thank you for not responding with anger when I deserved it. Jonathan read the message twice, a small smile crossing his face. He typed a simple response. Thank you for reaching out. That took courage. I'm glad you're asking questions. That's how we all grow. He didn't know if she would ever watch another episode, or if their encounter would lead to any lasting change. But he had learned long ago that planting seeds was often more important than seeing the harvest. The story might have ended there, but 6 months later, during a fan event for The Chosen, a woman approached him hesitantly. She looked familiar, though he couldn't place her immediately. You probably don't remember me, she began, but I'm the woman from the airplane who was horrible to you about your cross. Jonathan's eyes widened with recognition and genuine surprise. I've been watching your show, she continued, and I wanted to thank you for showing me what real faith looks like. It's not what I was taught growing up, but it's something I want to learn more about. Have you ever seen someone's mockery backfire so spectacularly when they attacked what they didn't understand? There's something powerful about watching arrogance crumble when it encounters authentic grace. What happens when we respond to cruelty with kindness instead of matching their energy? What if our most powerful response to hatred isn't fighting back, but simply being who we're called to be? Jonathan's response on that flight reminds us that living our faith authentically speaks louder than any argument we could make. He didn't need to defend himself with clever comebacks or harsh words. His quiet dignity and gracious response said everything that needed to be said. Sometimes the most profound witness happens not when we're trying to prove a point, but when we're simply living out our values under pressure. The woman who thought she was exposing someone's foolishness ended up discovering something she never expected: that real faith isn't about superiority or judgment, but about love that extends even to those who mock it. Her cruel words backfired because they revealed more about her own heart than about the man she was attacking. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe in responding to mockery with grace, and if you think authentic faith is more powerful than any argument. Because sometimes the best response to hatred is simply being who you're called to be and letting your life speak for itself.